The house was too quiet. Syra stood at the edge of the bed, clutching the glass of water that had long since lost its warmth. Her older brother, Denial, hovered behind her, arms folded, face rigid. Their mother's breathing was thin, like a thread unraveling slowly in the dark. "She's not waking up," Syra whispered. Denial didn't answer. He moved closer, crouched beside the bed, and gently took their mother's frail hand. The skin was cold, paper-thin, translucent in the morning light leaking through the curtains. A clock ticked. Somewhere in the street below, a hawker called out the day's offerings. Inside, time stood still. "Mama," Denial said, barely above a breath. "It's us. We're here." Her eyes opened, suddenly, as if pulled up from deep water. They were clouded, unfocused, but alive. "Syra," her voice was brittle. "Danny." "We're here," Syra said quickly, moving forward, brushing sweat from her mother's forehead. "Do you need something?" Their mother struggled for air. "Listen to me." Denial leaned in. Syra grasped her mother's fingers tighter. "You have to find the judge," she said. They exchanged glances. "What judge?" Denial asked, frowning. But their mother's eyes were far away now. "Tell him I kept my promise. He'll know." "Mama," Syra began, but her mother's lips parted once more, then stilled. She was gone. Silence. Denial stayed crouched, head bowed. Syra backed away slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. It wasn't unexpected. She'd been sick for weeks, but the finality felt like a door slamming shut with no warning. It wasn't the end of her life that left them trembling. It was her final words. Find the judge. The funeral was brief. Close friends, neighbors who spoke in hushed tones. The imam's prayer rang out steady and sure, but Syra barely heard any of it. Denial stood silent at her side, jaw locked tight. She said something before she passed. Syra said to him that night, when the guests were gone and the silence had returned. "I remember." They were in the kitchen now, the light humming above them. Between them sat the black notebook their mother always kept in her top drawer. She wrote everything in here. Denial said, fingers trailing over the leather, grocery lists, phone numbers, dreams even. Did she write about the judge? He opened the book, page after page of tidy Urdu script. Recipes, reminders, a line of poetry here and there, but nothing about a judge. Halfway through, he stopped. "What is it?" Syra asked. He turned the notebook around. On a page dated 8 years ago, their mother had written, "You don't bury guilt in a courtroom. You bury it in silence. But silence grows teeth." The next page was blank. Later that night, Denial stood alone on the balcony, phone in hand, the city breathing beneath him. He searched their mother's name, then combinations of judge, trial, case, but nothing turned up, no headlines, no records. Syra stepped out beside him. "There's nothing. Not yet." "I've never seen her afraid before," she murmured. "Not like that. Even when the doctor said, even then, she was calm. She wasn't afraid of dying." Denial said. She was afraid of being forgotten, of leaving something undone. They stood quietly. The wind picked up. Below, the streetlights flickered. Syra said, "You believe there really is a judge?" I believe she believed it mattered. They went back inside. The next morning, Syra found Denial already dressed, their mother's notebook in his bag. "Where are you going?" she asked. He looked at her evenly. "To find out who she was before we were born." Syra hesitated, then grabbed her coat. "I'm coming with you." He gave a small nod, and together they stepped out into morning sun, armed with a single phrase and the weight of a woman's final request. Somewhere out there was a judge, and he knew something. The judge didn't appear in any official searches. No name, no records, no mention in the court archives. They began with the simplest place, their mother's belongings. Her room, once so familiar, now felt like foreign ground. Everything was still where she'd left it. Scarves folded in careful stacks, the scent of rosewater lingering in the air. But now each drawer held the potential to unravel something they didn't understand. Denial opened the wardrobe, methodical. Syra knelt beside the bed, reaching underneath. Dust clung to her sleeves. Her hand brushed against the box. Wooden, locked. "Danny," she said, pulling it out. "Look." It was heavy, carved with faded floral patterns. There was no key. He didn't hesitate. Using a flathead screwdriver from the kitchen, Denial cracked the latch. Inside, the first thing they saw was a bundle of yellow newspaper clippings tied with a red string. Below them, a stack of letters. A photo album. A small black and white photograph sat loose at the top. Syra picked it up. Their mother, barely in her 20s, stood in the courthouse corridor, clutching a file to her chest. Her eyes were sharp, her posture rigid. Standing beside her was a man in a judge's robes. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at her. "I've never seen her like this," Syra murmured. Denial took the photo and flipped it over. One word was written in their mother's handwriting. Zamir. The name gave them something real. At the city records office, Denial scanned through old employee registries. Judges. Court officers. After an hour, he found him. Zamir Hussein. Appointed in 1991. Retired 2007. No public cases after that. Syra read over his shoulder. Why did she never mention him? Denial tapped the page. There's an address, listed as last known. They followed her across the river, to the edge of the city, an old neighborhood where government officers once lived, now faded with time. The house was small, fence quiet, paint peeled from the shutters. The gate hung crooked, but someone still lived there. A single light glowed from within. They stood across the street. "What do we even say?" Syra asked. "I don't know," Denial said, "but we came this far." As they approached the gate, the door creaked open just a few inches. A man stood behind the screen, his silhouette tall and still. "We're looking for Justice Zamir Hussein," Denial said clearly. No reply, only a soft metallic click, like a lock being turned from the inside. "Please," Syra added, stepping forward. We're Nusrat's children." Silence. Then the door opened wider. Zamir Hussein stepped into view. He looked older than in the photo, his beard gray, his eyes shadowed but unmistakable, his gaze fixed on them. When he spoke, his voice was dry, slow. "Nusrat," he said. The name lingered on his tongue, like it hurt to say. He looked at Syra, then Denial, his expression unreadable. Then he froze. No movement, no words, just a man suddenly hollowed out by memory. "Sir." Denial asked. Zamir blinked once, slowly, and without another word, he stepped back and shut the door. A final click echoed through the wood. Back home, Denial slammed the photo onto the table. He knew her, clearly. He froze when he saw us. Syra stared at the door in her mind. He didn't want to talk. He has to. He's part of whatever she carried to her grave. She opened the letters from the box. Each was written in delicate handwriting, in Urdu, addressed to N. Most were unsigned. "I think these are from him," Syra said quietly. Denial took one and read aloud. "Justice is not always blind. Sometimes it sees too clearly, and chooses to look away." They both sat in silence. "She wasn't just someone's wife," Syra said. "Someone's mother. She had a whole life before us. And someone took something from her." The final envelope in the stack was sealed and heavier than the rest. It had no return address, only their mother's name, in faded ink. Denial opened it slowly. Inside was a cassette tape. Old, worn, unlabeled. "What the hell is on this?" he whispered. Syra looked at him. "I know where we can find out." They didn't own a cassette player. No one they knew under 30 did. But Syra remembered an old music shop tucked behind a bus station, a dusty relic from another era that somehow still existed, squeezed between a tailoring shop and a bakery. They walked there in silence, the cassette wrapped in a handkerchief, like it might break if held too tightly. The shop smelled of paper and rusted metal. Faded posters of forgotten singers hung from the walls. The man behind the counter wore thick glasses and looked up with mild surprise. You're not here for Bluetooth speakers, are you? He joked. Denial placed a cassette on the counter. We need to hear what's on this. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow. Still got a working deck in the back. Come on. He led them behind a curtain into a narrow room filled with wires and tape decks. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, slicing through a cracked window. He popped the cassette in, adjusted the volume, and pressed play. At first, there was nothing. Then came a click. A woman's voice, soft, measured, tired. If you are listening to this, then I am gone. Cyrus' breath caught. It was their mother. I don't know if this will reach anyone, but if it does, let it be my children. Denial. Syra, I didn't tell you everything. I couldn't. I thought I could die with a silence. But silence is a liar. It eats the truth until only shame remains. She paused. A small intake of breath. I worked for the court, not as a lawyer, not officially. I translated testimonies, filed reports, worked the archives. I was good at being invisible. The voice trembled but continued. There was a case in 1997. A girl, no older than Syra is now. Her name was Layla. She was raped, brutalized. She came alone. No lawyer, no father, just a broken body and more courage than I have ever seen. She testified. She begged. A long pause. But the man she accused was the son of someone powerful, a minister. I remember standing in the hall with Judge Zamir. I asked him, "What will you do?" Another breath. He looked at me and said, "This is above us now." And then he signed the dismissal. The tape hissed for a few seconds. Then I never forgave him, and I never forgave myself. The shopkeeper looked away. Denial stared at the floor. Cyrus' hands were trembling. I took copies of the transcripts. I stored them in places no one would think to look. If you want the truth, start with a file I hid inside the red Quran cover. The old one from my father's village. I brought it with me when we left Dadu. You'll find it in the chest. You have to finish what I couldn't. Another pause, then the final words. Find the judge. Make him see what silence costs. Click. The tape ended. The red Quran cover was there, just as she said, tucked deep in the old storage chest at the back of her closet. Inside, a slim folder wrapped in cloth. Court transcripts, witness statements, photos, one of a girl in a hospital bed, half her face hidden beneath gauze. Another the accused, a grinning young man in a cricket jersey. The stamp on the top read, District Court, case number 17A, dismissed. Syra flipped through the pages, her lips pressed tight. She kept this all these years. She wanted us to do something with it. Denial said, "But what?" Syra asked, "The case is cold. The man probably moved on with his life. Maybe he's out of the country. Maybe he's not." Denial was on his phone. He turned the screen to her. A recent news article. A political fundraiser. The accused, now a successful businessman and regional advisor. Smiling. Shaking hands with officials. Syra stared at the photo, bile rising in her throat. He's still here. And Zamir knows, Denial said. He's lived with it for decades. Syra sat down heavily. She didn't want revenge. No, Denial agreed. She wanted the truth known. She wanted him, the judge, to finally face it. They sat with that in silence. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. Tomorrow, Denial said, folding the file, we go back to him. The door opened slower this time. Zamir Hussein stood just inside the threshold, wearing the same beige sweater from the day before. His eyes, bloodshot and hollow, drifted between Syra and Denial like he had aged years overnight. Denial didn't wait for permission. He held out the black and white photograph. She kept this. Zamir stared at the image. His jaw clenched and loosened. He stepped aside. No words, just a quiet invitation they'd been waiting for. Inside, the house smelled of sandalwood and paper. Bookshelves lined the walls, sagging with age. Court memoirs, Islamic philosophy. A thick layer of dust rested on everything, as if time had been politely excused. They sat in his modest, drawing room. He offered no tea, no pleasantries. Syra placed a folder gently on the table between them. He didn't look at it. She left a recording. Denial said, before she died. Still, Zamir said nothing. She talked about the case. About Layla. At that, he flinched. I know who she was, he said quietly. So do we, Syra said. And we know what happened. The dismissal, the silence, the power behind the name. Zamir's voice, when it finally came, was low and dry. You think this is justice? No, Denial said. This is truth. Justice comes after. Zamir leaned back, closed his eyes, and exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that breath since 1997. She didn't want to let it go, he said, even after the threats. Even after the police raided her desk. She kept pressing me. In the hallway. In my chambers. Her eyes, God, her eyes, they wouldn't let me forget. He looked at Syra. She could have ruined herself. She had no protection. She wasn't supposed to speak. But she did. Syra's voice was quiet. And you didn't listen. I did, he whispered. But I didn't act. The words hung like ash in the air. I was afraid. Zamir said, not of death, of being erased. One ruling, and I'd be finished. My career, my name, my family. I told myself it wasn't my place. And what was your place? Denial asked coldly. To watch it happen? To sign your name and walk away. Zamir looked down at his hands. They were trembling. I have lived with her voice every day. You think I don't remember that girl's face? Or the way Nusrat stared at me when I said it was above us? I remember everything. He gestured toward the folder. You have the transcripts. You have the details. But what do you want from me now? Syra leaned forward. Her tone was steady. We want your testimony. On record, we want you to say what happened. What you saw. What you didn't do. Zamir blinked. A confession? A reckoning, she replied. Denial nodded. You gave silence to the powerful. Give truth to the forgotten. For a long moment, Zamir said nothing. Then he reached into a drawer beneath the bookshelf and pulled out an old leather-bound journal. He opened it, slowly, revealing pages of handwritten notes, case numbers, personal reflections. At the bottom of one page, Case 17A, dismissed. I buried a voice today. He handed it to Syra. I'll give you this, and I'll record a statement. But I won't survive a trial. Not at my age. Not with the men behind this still in power. You're not the one who deserves to suffer, Denial said. I know. A silence settled between them. This one felt different. Less sharp. Less full of ghosts. I never told her I was sorry, Zamir murmured. She never gave me the chance. Syra stood. She didn't want an apology. She wanted the truth to outlive her. He nodded. Then help me make sure it does. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Syra and Denial stepped out into the fading light, the journal clutched in her hands. He'll talk, she said. And when he does, Denial replied, so will we. They walked home, their mother's final words echoing like a vow in their hearts. Find the judge. They had. But the truth was far from finished. The camera light turned red. Zamir sat rigid in the chair, flanked by shelves heavy with law books. Denial set the recorder on the table between them. Syra watched from behind the lens, her finger hovering over the stop button. Not to pause him, but in case he changed his mind. He didn't. My name is Zamir Hussein, the former judge began, voice steady. And what I'm about to say may cost me what remains of my reputation. But silence has lived too long in me. He cleared his throat, then continued, gaze fixed straight ahead. In 1997, a girl named Layla Banu brought charges of rape against Cameron Aziz, son of then Federal Minister Abdul Aziz. She had no legal counsel. She had physical evidence. She had a witness, her younger brother, who was later pressured into recanting under threats. Syra felt her stomach tighten. She had read the transcript, heard her mother speak of the case in the tape, but hearing it spoken aloud by the man who'd buried it made it real in a new way. I was a presiding judge, Zamir said, and I dismissed the case. Not because she lied, not because the evidence was weak, but because I was told to. A man in a dark car waited outside my home the night before the ruling. He didn't threaten me. He warned me, do what's best for your family. He paused. The silence in the room now felt like a confession itself. Nusrat tried to stop me. She followed the case even after it was sealed. She kept copies. I warned her to stop. She didn't. She was braver than I ever was. He looked away from the camera just for a moment. She deserved more than what the system gave her. Click. Denial ended the recording. The room felt heavier, not from guilt, but from the weight of long-buried truth being brought back into the light. They uploaded the video anonymously. Alongside it, they posted the court transcripts, the letters, and Layla's hospital report. The site crashed 3 times in the first hour. By the end of the day, hashtags were trending. Hashtag Justice for Layla. Hashtag Nusrat Knew. Hashtag Zamir Confesses. Some said it was fake, that the footage was edited. Others recognized Zamir from old court broadcasts. A few journalists reached out. One of them found Layla's name in hospital records. She had left the country years ago. No one knew where she was now, but the internet didn't need her location to remember her story. By the 3rd day, a news van parked outside Zamir's home. He refused interviews, but he didn't run. He sat by the window, watching the consequences of his past rise like smoke. Syra visited him once. She brought him tea. They didn't speak. He nodded in gratitude, and that was enough. Later that week, Denial received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph, a much older Layla, standing in front of a small bookstore in Canada. On the back, in careful Urdu script, it read, "Tell Nusrat she was right to fight." It was unsigned. Syra wept when she saw it. Then she smiled through her tears. She fought alone, she said, but she wasn't alone forever. A month passed. The minister's son, Cameron Aziz, released a statement denying everything, but the pressure mounted. Journalists uncovered more cases. Old victims came forward. The minister himself vanished from public life. There was no trial yet, but the silence had broken. The truth was no longer buried. Syra and Denial stood at their mother's grave on the 40th day after her passing. Denial placed a single white rose on the soil. Syra unfolded a photo of Layla and tucked it beneath the headstone. She said, "Make him see what silence cost," Syra murmured. He saw, Denial said, "and now everyone else does too." They stood there for a long time, the wind warm and still. Above them, the skies stretched wide, heavy with light, like a story finally ready to be told. It began with a summons, a formal letter, delivered in person, sealed by the High Court. Zamir Hussein was requested to appear before a Judicial Review Board, voluntarily, at first. His testimony had rippled through the legal system like a thrown stone. Judges whispered. Law clerks reread closed files. Some admired him for speaking out. Others called it betrayal. But he did not run. When Denial brought him the letter, Zamir simply nodded. "I've waited 28 years for this," he said. "It was never going to come without costs." He folded the letter neatly and set it beside his Quran. "I'm ready." Syra watched the review hearing from a courtroom bench tucked behind a pillar. It wasn't public, but she had been allowed to attend, just barely. Zamir's confession was played aloud. The footage crackled, the words measured, but steady. He admitted it all. The dismissed case, the warning, the minister, his fear, and her Nusrat. "She believed in justice more than I believed in safety," he said before the panel. "She was right. I was weak, and now I live in her shadow." When it ended, no applause followed, just a heavy, careful silence. The board ruled that Zamir's license would be formally revoked and his past rulings reviewed, particularly any case involving state pressure. There would be no prison. He was too old, too frail. But his name would never again be written with honor in legal circles. It was justice. Perhaps not retribution, but recognition. Outside the courthouse, Journalists waited. Syra and Denial stood side by side. Microphones thrust at them. Do you think this is enough? Are you satisfied with the ruling? What would your mother say? Syra spoke into the noise. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth to live. That's what happened here. And then they left, no grand statement, no need to gloat. Her mother's voice echoed in her heart. Tell him I kept my promise. She had. Zamir died 3 months later. No drama, no spectacle. A quiet passing, alone in his home. The only item found beside his bed was a letter addressed to Syra and Denial. I have nothing left to offer but truth, and I gave it to you. May it serve better in your hands than it ever did in mine. Tell her, if there's a place where the wronged and the cowardly meet again, I will ask for forgiveness with open eyes. They buried him quietly. No crowd, just 2 mourners and a man from the mosque who didn't ask questions. They placed his journal beside him. A year passed. The case against Cameron Aziz was reopened under public pressure. Investigations began anew. More victims emerged, some older, some recent. He disappeared again, this time from every camera and every speech. No conviction yet, but no silence either. The world had changed. One evening, Syra sat in their mother's old room, now converted into a small study. On the wall hung 2 framed items. The photo of young Nusrat in the courthouse, and beneath it, the message from Layla. Tell Nusrat she was right to fight. Denial entered with 2 cups of tea. Another letter came. He said, From who? Someone from Layla's shelter. She's opening one in Karachi. Wants to name it after Mom. Syra smiled. She'd hate that. Yeah, he said, but she'd also secretly love it. They sipped their tea in silence. The sky outside was deep blue, the first stars blinking into view. Syra said, Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing? Dragging it all into the light. Denial took a long sip, then looked at her. Justice doesn't live in comfort. It lives where it hurts. We didn't fix the past, but we didn't let it be forgotten either. She nodded. Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains. Somewhere far away, a voice echoed in memory. Find the judge. They had, and in doing so, they found the woman their mother had been, not just a victim of silence, but a warrior against it,